I'm slow down a little bit.
Yeah. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. I got my man Heath Taylor. Y'all see this big old thing sticking in his face right here? Today we're about to give you a full breakdown, a complete guide to everything you'd ever want to know about fishing big swim baits.
We'll try anyway.
Show that thing off. Both of them. Show it. They're both beautiful. Show them both off. There it is. Y'all stay tuned. Well, guys, right now we're out here in the fall of the year. I got my man Heath Taylor. Now, this guy is an absolute swim bait expert. And when I mean swim bait expert, I mean multifaceted swim bait expert. Ever since I've known him, it's hard to get anything in his hands but a swim bait, it seems. He usually has 10 to 12 different swim baits on the deck of the boat every time I show up. Not only that, he's taking it to a whole other level because my man makes a whole bunch of different swim baits himself. SmashTechBaits.com are where you can find the swim baits that we'll be using today. But what we're going to do, it's not about selling you baits or telling you Heaths are the best. Today we're going to give you guys all the help we can. We're going to get inside this thing, which is a little bit worrying that we're going to do this. So if you're brave, follow along with us today. We'll dig inside the brain of the mad swim bait hatter over here that makes them, creates them. And as you just saw to start the video off, that wasn't planned. Like, we didn't wait for that.
No.
That just happened that way. I was literally trying to get the cameras rolling and everything get set up to start this video, and he catches that big one on a big bait. But we're gonna try and get inside his head and help you guys understand more about how, when, where, why, just all the little details about fishing big swim baits. Well, you know, as everything we do on the channel, Heath, this isn't really scripted at all. This is just me coming up with it off the top of my head. And I think if we're gonna start at the beginning level of swim baits, I think the first question that most people have, if they're relatively new to it or maybe haven't ever tried it at all and want to get into big swim baits, because there is some allure to throwing something this big, right? As I've got lily pad stems on me right here. But to throwing something this big and just the possibilities of what might bite it, I think is what draws us all to it. But in the beginning, I think for a lot of people when they start out, man, it's kind of difficult to wrap their head around when to throw a big bait and when not to.
Yeah, a lot of people are intimidated as far as just putting something like that in their hand and dedicating some time to it. You get a lot of people that will just pick it up and they'll throw it, you know, for 5 or 10 minutes, you know, on a day like today that's really not the greatest swim bait day, in my opinion. You know, a lot of people like, you know, sunny days for swim baits, which is good, but I always like to have some wind, and really some of the best days I've had is when you have, you know, some overcast and a little bit of breeze as well. But yeah, a lot of people they think that some complicated, you know, mystical thing to swim bait, in which 99% of swim baits, you know, especially soft swim baits, you know, there's categories: soft swim baits and hard swim baits. Yep. And then you can branch off into hard swim baits, into glide baits, jointed baits and stuff like that, wake baits. And
this is a really simple one right here, and that's what he means, folks. This right here is a weedless soft bait. This is the wag shad, which you can find at SmashTechBaits.com, but this bait right here is got great action on it, but as you can see, pretty big profile bait right there. And then what Heath is throwing is a hard body glide bait, if I'm seeing correctly there. Yep. Yeah, that's a glide.
I'm throwing a glide bait, but you know, as far as like your bigger soft plastic, whether it be weedless or line through, it's fairly simple. Like 99.9% of the time, you're throwing it out there, you're pointing your rod at it, and you're just steadily reeling it real slow. Like I said, there's no,
just like this, right?
There's no magical.
I will say one thing for the weedless baits, especially, like I'm throwing this up in these pads and throwing it into where the pads are kind of scattered and fishing it through them. But you know, I know one thing: if you point the rod right at it, like right there, my bait just got hung up. But if you point the rod right at it, the bait on a weedless bait really kind of bulldogs through all that stuff. And a lot of people want to hold their rod down here like this. Well, when they do that, that allows that junk, whatever you're catching, to kind of load the rod up a little bit, and it wads up on the bait a little better. Whereas if you point right at it, it puts direct pressure on it, just pops it through there.
Correct. And then of course, if you're throwing like a line through, you're not going to be throwing into the pads, like
Right.
fishing pads, you know, some pads and pad stems right now. You're not gonna normally be throwing a line through, but you can get away with a line through throwing over like hydrilla and stuff like that.
Where is your line
We'll
through?
grab a line through that will kind of show people what we're talking about.
Show people what we're talking about here. This is the line through poacher that Heath makes. As you can see, the line goes through the nose of the bait here. And there's just a weightless treble hook hooked into the bottom of it. So it's a weightless plastic. It rides, you know, most of your line throughs, unless they're weighted internally, they're gonna
have a little tin weight
yeah.
inside.
Yeah. And are there any out there that actually have a weight inside them where they get down a little more?
There are some companies that'll
That's what I thought.
That'll use like a lead weight.
Yeah.
Problem with the lead weight is if you store a bait that has a lead insert, over time it'll completely
Discolor it.
discolor the bait,
Right.
and sometimes even make it split open.
Right.
So that's why I've always used the tin inserts for a long, long time.
In most of these line throughs, they're going to ride really high in the water column. You can fish them really slow, and you kind of have to fish them really slow, and they stay, like I said, really high in the water column and all that.
And I will get, that's something, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I will get messages sometimes and comments sometimes from people that maybe they're new to swim bait fishing, and they'll buy a line through swim bait and they throw it out there and they reel it like they're fishing a spinnerbait or a chatterbait or something, and they're reeling it fairly fast, and they'll send me a message or something and say, you know, I can't get this swim bait to stay down. I can't get it to
no, you got to slow down.
And you know, they weren't designed to be fished way down in the water column. They're designed.
They weren't designed to be fished fast either.
You know, and you can remember this because back years ago when we were figuring out the line through system of the way we were going to make them, you know, there were some very, very good swim bait guys that I was talking to on Lake Fork, and I would send them some baits and they would say, make it lighter.
Yep.
Make it lighter. Make it lighter.
Well, that's the whole key and the strength of a line through is it stays up in the water column and just stays in their face so long as you reel it so slow, but because it is weightless and so light, stays in their face a long time. I do want to circle back a little bit to when to throw a swim bait and when not to, right? Like I want to talk about that a little more, because I think for me, I know something I still kind of deal with mentally, and I certainly did in the beginning, is you talk about people pick the swim bait up, throw it a little bit, and then they quit throwing it. They don't commit to it. Well, I know, like for me, it's like I felt like, you know, I don't really know what I'm doing with this thing, and I'm missing bites. Like because I'm throwing this big bait, I got 2 and 3 pounders that won't bite what I'm throwing, so I need to throw a spinner bait or a chatterbait or a worm or whatever it is that you have confidence in. You end up going back to your confidence bait because you feel like you're missing bites. What do you think about that?
It is a commitment thing. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say you're not going to miss out on some of those smaller fish, but don't think that you're completely eliminating, you know, 2 and 3 pounders.
That's exactly what I was going to say. A 2 pounder will eat a big bait in a heartbeat, Jack.
I'll have 2 pounders just completely annihilate this 7.5 inch glide bait, and like I said, that soft swim bait's about the same length.
Yep.
And they'll just come up and completely,
I'll hammer down.
Yeah, completely annihilate it. And the thing, I guess, that is so, and that addicted me to swim baits years and years ago was just the bite on a bigger swim bait is unlike any bite that you'll get. You know, you think that a bite on the topwater is explosive, you know, your favorite, you know, throwing a frog, it's really fun, explosive, but they do not hit those baits near as hard as they will hit a big, you know, 7 inch, either weedless, line through, or a big glide bait. They just completely, it's like they know they have to kill it before they can turn around and eat it.
Yeah, the intensity of the bite, right? It's just a different level than it is with any other bait or technique out there. There's not anything close to the comparison. And, you know, I kind of, right before I started guiding was when I really started getting off on the swim bait tangent for me, the bigger swim bait tangent. You know, and there's a difference. Throwing a little swim bait, it's not the same. You know, yes, little swim baits, I know you throw them, I throw them, we all throw them, and they're dang sure useful and good baits, but it's not the same deal as throwing a big bait. Throwing a big bait, what got me hooked on it once I committed to them and started getting bites was 2 things. And one was what you just said, the intensity of that bite. I mean, it will literally scare you at times. You go a long time without a bite and you kind of lulls you to sleep, then they hit it so hard it kind of makes you jump a little bit and
Yeah,
spooks
and
you.
It's one of the, you try to explain, I've tried to explain the bite to people, you know, friends of mine and stuff that, you know, had never really thrown a big bait, and then, you know, most of my friends have kind of thrown it by now, but the first time that you sit there and you try to tell them about what the bite's going to be like,
can't really put it in words,
and then you put it in their hand and they get that first bite, and it almost scares them, and their eyes get real big, and they look at you, and they have that. It's almost like shooting an automatic rifle. It puts a grin on your face automatically. That's just what happens.
Yeah.
So they look up at you with a really goofy smile, and they say, "Okay, now I really understand what you meant."
Yeah, there's only a few things in life that really can compare to that feeling when they come, when a fish hits a bait that hard, and it's the fish hitting a big bait that hard.
Yeah. Shooting
I think
machine gun.
shooting a really high caliber, especially a higher caliber machine gun, or even like, you know, bazooka, RPG, that type of deal, right?
It just for some reason puts a smile on your face.
There's one other moment in life that probably compares to it, but I don't think this channel is the appropriate place to discuss that, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
So
keep it PG.
we'll save that for somebody else's channel. But it's a moment, man. It's just that moment, and that addicted me to it. And then the other thing is, yeah, you do catch some smaller fish at times on big baits, but man, when you get a bite and you hook up on one of these, a lot of the time it's her, dude. It is an absolute beast.
And that's what the thing that goes through your mind.
Spinning your rod. Yes, it's addicting. It is addicting, and I will caution you about this. If you're new to swim bait fishing and you're getting into it, I had somebody tell me this one time, and it was actually when I started guiding. Right before I started guiding, I got on the big swim bait deal real bad, and I got the itch, and I kind of started getting addicted. And when I started guiding, I was talking to another guide buddy of mine that fished them a lot too. He goes, "Man, you got to be careful. Do not forget how to bass fish, because it is so addicting. It can take over where you don't." There's a lot of people, you know, the swim bait world, man. They won't throw anything but a big swim bait.
You know, there's groups, and I love throwing a big swim bait, and I would rather catch them on a big swim bait than anything in the world. But there's a reason, and I know you've said it before on this channel. I make swim baits from 3 inches to 7.5, 8 inches, and I will throw every one of them. And I will, you know, I'm not scared to grab a spinning rod and throw a little tiny swim bait, but none of it compares to throwing a bigger bait. Now, like I said, when you do go to switch to a bigger bait, there's things you've got to beef up, you know. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't know any better, and we were throwing swim baits on, you know, we'd grab our flipping stick, whatever we used to throw a worm or a jig with, and we'd spool it up and sling it out there. But one of the biggest things is these bigger baits, especially these glide baits and these bigger, heavier, soft swim baits, you can't just whip cast them out there. You've got to lob them out there.
Yeah, buddy. Show us what you're talking about.
So like you just grab it and lob it out there.
That's it. See how he threw that to the sky? That's what I tell people on guide trips when we are throwing big baits. Start it down low and throw it. Try to throw the bait up to the sky.
Because what you'll have is a lot of times beginners throwing swim baits, and when I'm throwing these bigger hard baits, I use big mono, like 20, 25 pound big game.
Absolutely, me too. With the treble hook ones, yes, I like to throw the big mono.
It's a lot more forgiving than braid or fluorocarbon. And
you get the extra shock absorption to keep a treble hook hooked up, but one thing that I really like about it, I think the most for throwing, you know, some of these glide baits are 4, 5, 6 ounce baits. They're really heavy. Man, that's a lot of stress on your knot when you're throwing that thing out there all day, right? And the shock absorption and the stretch of that mono, I feel like, helps relieve some of that stress on your knot.
Well, what you'll have a lot of times for people that maybe a lot of times aren't that experienced, or they might be using the wrong tackle, they'll, instead of lobbing it, they'll kind of start whip casting these things.
Mm-hmm.
What will happen is if you get a backlash, you know, one that just blows up and it pops, you know, you're sending a $150 to $300 swim bait
sometimes,
out into the depths, and it's going to sink out of sight. So that's one reason you lob them, and you use forgiving, you know, 20, 25 pound mono, and it really reduces your chances of breaking one off, you know, casting one off.
Talk to us a little bit about you're throwing a glide bait, and we talked about just point at it and reel it real slow for a line through or a weedless bait. You throwing that glide bait, it's got a single joint, it kind of swims in an S curve, and I see you're just doing a little twitch with your reel handle there. Talk me through that retrieve you're doing.
The way I made this glide bait was I wanted to be able to fish it slow, and that's why it's called the slow glide. Like you see some guys like to burn and pause their glide baits. Now when I fish a segmented,
I thought you just like Fog Hat and wanted a cool theme song for your bait.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
That could be something. But when when I throw a glide bait, I made these things to just barely sink, almost suspend, and like I'll just let it kind of hang there and hover, and I'm just doing almost half to 3/4 reel turns to kind of you pick up and you bump the slack basically of your, and whenever your reel hits the end of that slack,
turn this way a little bit for us, but so we can see a little bit. There you go.
Whenever your reel hits the end of that slack, it's going to make that glide bait dart one way and then dart back the other way.
So that's making that bait go.
So it's just sitting here going like this, back, and it just hovers, and then back this way, and it just hovers.
Yeah.
So I'll just, you feel yourself kind of hitting that, and it's almost a pull and not really a pop. You just kind of bump the slack to where to where it feels it gets tight. And that's how I normally fish one. Now,
is that how you fish the glide bait most of the time?
99% of the time. Now,
okay.
if I'm fishing, say I get around a stump or something, and I'm fishing it like this, sometimes I might chop it a couple times and kind of make it do a couple quick turns.
Just do something more erratic around that piece of cover. Gotcha.
But if I'm just fishing down a bank, trying to cover water, this is how I'm fishing it. Now, there are times where I'll just straight, steady, slow retrieve it, and that's really the only other retrieves I'll do with the glide bait.
Yeah, we're talking about bigger baits today, and we both are throwing. I'm throwing my rod that I just designed for swim bait fishing, and this is our LGB series rod, all American made from the blank on out, and this is a 711 heavy SB, heavy swim bait. It's really made for throwing heavy swim baits, bigger swim baits in Alabama rigs is what it's really designed to do. But for me, this rod is really only necessary if I'm throwing a heavy bait like Heath is throwing, a hard bait that weighs several ounces, 3, 4, 5 ounce, even a 2 ounce bait. That's what I want to throw on this rod. And then the other time is when I'm throwing a bait that has an 8 or 10 aught hook, right, Heath? Because if you're going to have an 8 or 10 aught hook, you need a big stout rod to drive the hook home. And this is absolutely the rod to do that kind of damage. And you're throwing a similar type of rod made by Dobbins, right? That's Dobbins swim bait rod there.
It's a Dobbins.
And that's like a 7, 9, or 10.
It's an 806 is what they call it.
So it's an 8-footer, and I got 7. So basically the same rod. Dobbins makes a great rod. No knock on them at all. I think we've made a great rod. Just two good, right around 8-foot swim bait rods, and that's what you need for the bigger baits. But there's a lot of baits like a line through, right?
Yeah, a line through you can get away with something a little softer.
Yeah.
And anything that's like, because it's a treble hook bait. Yes, it's a big swim bait, but it's a treble hook bait, and even the 7-inch line throughs, you can still get away with something a little bit softer, because when they eat that, you want to let them eat it.
Yeah, and with the treble hook, you do tend to want to have a little more shock. I actually have a 7.6 medium heavy that I've designed that I really like to throw those line throughs on. They don't weigh that much. They're weightless, so you can throw them fine on it, and it gives you that extra bend for that treble hook.
Yeah, even like this glide bait, it's really not that. It's only about a 2.5 ounce bait.
Okay, so that's not a real heavy one. There's some that are real heavy, yeah.
I tried to keep the weight fairly down.
Manageable.
And then you're looking at a lot of your soft swim baits. You're looking at ounce to ounce and a quarter. Right. You can get by with something not.
Well, even a bait like this wag shed, I like having the bigger rod for the hook set scenario because we're throwing a 10-aught hook in this, but 8 or 10-aught hook, you could probably get away with like a 7.6 heavy, and you're still going to be able to set the hook pretty well on something like that. So if you don't, also that's another thing, right? Don't be intimidated or hesitant to start fishing big swim baits because you don't have a big swim bait rod. That's something we've talked about in the past. You don't necessarily need an 8-foot broomstick or whatever we want to call these things that we're fishing to do it.
Does it help? Yes, because a lot of times we're making really long casts.
That's a big part of it.
And yours might be setting the hook from a long ways away, and like I said, those hooks, the wire size on those hooks is really thick.
Heavy gauge.
So you do want something with a lot of backbone. But like I said, I caught a lot of fish growing up on swim baits with a flipping stick before I could afford, you know, swim bait rods and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of long cast. I know that's something that I think we both believe in. Fish tend to follow swim baits for a long time.
Exactly.
And so, you know, talk to me about the importance of casting the bait a long ways.
You wanna get that bait as far away from your boat as you can, basically, because this is not, for the very, very vast majority, it's not a reaction bite. A lot of these fish are going to track and follow this bait for a distance before they commit to it. You know, whereas, you know, you're throwing a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, you might go by a piece of cover and they might snatch at it and react to it. Well, a lot of times these fish, because there's not another bait that imitates a shad or a bluegill as well as a swim bait does, so a lot of times they are completely convinced that that's something they're going to eat, and they're going to track it down, and they're going to eat it. You know, not just react to it out of instinct. So a lot of times, you know, I've had a lot of fish, especially these glide baits. You notoriously will get follows from fish, especially in clear water. You know, they do it in this water's not that clear, and really the clearer water is better for your swim bait bite. That's not to say that you can't catch fish in a little bit dirtier water, but well, the drawing power in clear water is what you really, really like.
The clear water deal kind of relates to the long cast deal, right? The clearer the water is, the wider area you have to draw a fish to your swim bait. And since it does draw them to it, there's no bait that draws bass to it like a swim bait does. And so the bigger area that you can draw from, the better. Clearer water means they can see it further away, means you can draw them from a bigger area. And also the same thing with longer casts. That's part of the longer cast deal. The farther that bait is out there, the longer it's swimming back to you, the bigger area you're covering, the more fish you have a chance to draw to your bait. And I know something we've talked about in the past too is a lot of times what happens is, you know, you'll get a bump on a swim bait. A fish will bump it and not eat it. That happens all the time. And you actually had an underwater camera on your line in a fairly clear water lake where you could see them pretty good, and you were the one that taught me this, because we used to always think you get bumped.
Yeah, you thought it was the same fish.
And then all of a sudden one eats it, and you think it's that fish is bumping it a couple times, then coming back and finally eating it. Well, what we found out on that camera of yours was that you get one behind it, and you could actually, your swim bait swimming, and you get one right behind it. And then all of a sudden 2 or 3 are behind it, and then one comes out of nowhere and just bumps it but doesn't eat it. And then another one gets curious, he goes up and bumps it and doesn't eat it. And now you've got 5 or 6 fish behind your swim bait. And then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere from the side, one comes up and just smashes it. And that's the one you end up catching.
It becomes a competition.
That's what I'm getting at. The longer you keep it in the water and swimming to you, the more fish you get around it, the more competitive they get, right?
Because, you know, they may not be hungry and they may not really want it. They may have just eaten a 8-inch gizzard shad, but they don't want that other fish to have it, so they're going to go ahead and eat it.
Well, we both have 2 boys, and I can tell you that right now, I would bet none of the 4 are thinking about ice cream. But if they're all together and one of them gets ice cream,
everybody's going to want
them other 3 going to have some ice cream, Bubba. Like, and these bass ain't no different. They can be not thinking about eating anything at all, but if one of their compadres goes to feed on something, they're going to be looking for their turn too.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening when I did that.
It was such a cool video.
Like I thought for years and years that, you know, because they will hit it and almost knock the rod out of your hand, but you wouldn't have them, because when they bite a swim bait like that, you just want to keep reeling.
Yeah.
Just keep reeling until one loads up on it, and then you set the hook.
Sure.
Well, you'd like, man, how did he hit it and not get it? Well, they're just charging it and trying to kind of kill it and wound it, and then out of nowhere, the other, you know, the one that's really going to get it comes out of nowhere and gets it.
And that is the key when they bump it and don't get it, to me, is to just keep it coming at the same pace. Whatever pace you were at when they bumped it, that's getting their attention, that's getting them to track it. Just keep that bait coming at the same pace. Don't swing on them, don't set the hook yet. Just same pace, and a lot of times, eventually one's gonna come in there and eat it. Talk to me a little bit about the mental commitment level, because like we talked about in the beginning, people pick it up and then put it down, pick it up and then put it down. How important is it, and how do you go about gaining the commitment level to just throw a swim bait?
You know, a lot of it's just putting it in your hand. And I would tell a lot of people to start off with something, you know, if you have never thrown swim baits in your life, if you're completely starting out new, you know, go to something like a 5-inch, like a poacher, line through poacher or weedless poacher. something like that is still a bigger bodied lure. A lot of people look at that and think it's a big bait. I look at it and it to me it's small.
Little, yeah.
But a lot of people look at it and they're like, man, that's a big bait.
Absolutely.
But to me, it's really not. But it's something that you can actually get a lot of bites on and gain confidence in. And then as you gain confidence in something like a 5-inch bait, then bump up to a 6 or 7-inch bait and just, spend time. And a lot of times, people will make the mistake of using one when, their first time to use it is a day that maybe not conducive, or a lake that's not really conducive to throwing a swim bait. Like if you go to, say you were going to Lake Fork in mid-August and you wanted to go throw a line through swim bait, you're
probably gonna be disappointed.
Yeah, you're gonna be awful disappointed. Now if you're going to want to go throw a line through swim bait and you go in
April or
March or April or May,
yeah.
You might can gain some confidence.
Yeah, boy.
Doing that.
Yeah, boy.
So a lot of it is picking the conditions. If
Well, speaking of that, when is the time to throw it? Let's talk about that, because you just said March, April, May. We're here. This is actually Halloween.
Yeah, this is Halloween
it's October 31st.
And it's getting close to when I like to throw a bigger swim bait. We haven't really had a lot of cool weather this fall.
Not yet.
But once that water, like we're looking at mid-60s, and it's getting really close. That mid-60s to upper 50s.
Yep.
In the fall, I like to throw a big swim bait in the fall. So
I think the month of November is swim bait month for the fall deal. For the fall deal, the month of November seems to be swim bait month.
The window for a lot of places,
or at least around here. Now, if you're in a different part of the country, different deal.
Like if you have lakes that have grass.
Oh, different deal.
Now, you can throw a swim bait all winter long.
Almost year round,
yeah,
right?
I will throw a swim bait all winter long in a grass filled lake, because you can slow roll those swim baits over the top of that grass and pick off a lot of those fish even in the cold water months.
Well, and there's all different ways to present a swim bait these days, right? All different ways. So there is, like, we get to summertime, right, and we just put it on a big old 1-ounce head. And we get ourselves a big old 7-inch or 6-inch hollow body or something like that. Well, you could even throw a wag shad. This big old joker right here can go on a 1-ounce head. Now we can throw it in the summer, right?
Yeah, and I've thrown that wag shad even using live scope. That's a whole nother
avenue, whole other aspect.
Is with swim baits and forward-facing sonar. Is I've been able to pick off big fish with a bigger swim bait like a wag shad out in open water, suspended fish, using like a belly weighted 10-aught hook, the one that comes stock with a 1/2 ounce. You can throw it out there and count it down, or watch it on your live scope and watch it go down there and fish in 20 foot of water. But sometimes those fish are suspended, say they're in trees like at Fork, and you can reel it by a lot of those trees, 10 to 12 foot down, and keep it down there, just reeling it nice and slow.
I will say this, for a beginner wanting to throw the baits we're throwing here today, this is a very lightly weighted weedless bait. He's got the glide bait, slow sinking glide bait. You want the fish to be shallow to throw these 2 rigs we're fishing now. And this is kind of getting into the peak of the fall bite, so there's a lot of fish shallow. So, to me, for a beginner, the general rule of thumb should be this. If you've got relatively clear water and a good percentage of the bass should be up shallow, it's swim bait time. That's that, and it don't matter whether that's whatever time of year. If there's a good percentage of the fish up shallow and the water's relatively clear, swim bait is a great option.
And then of course you've seen it happen on the Elite Series a lot. Zaldane throws a swim bait a lot. Almost to a fault sometimes.
I think so, yeah.
And
Jakobsen,
yeah, Carl throws it a lot. But you've seen them have success, and it's not just on grass lakes with
right.
How many times have you seen them throw a glide bait or a soft swim bait around docks? Docks. If you have a dock lake, it can be a great swim bait. As long as there's clear water and docks, you can do really well on swim baits.
Well, look at the birthplace, right? California. How many giant teenage class bass have been caught around docks with those big swim baits out there?
That was one of the tournaments that really fueled my swim bait addiction even more and got me to making swim baits and stuff was
that old Clear Lake event.
the Clear Lake event.
Steve Kennedy.
One.
Yes, sir.
Watching him throw a Huddleston around those docks and around that island, you know, and he'd go by that one bush and 10-pounder would jump all over it.
A Huddleston and a there was an osprey bait mixed in there, wasn't there?
Yep.
A Huddleston and a tournament talon or a wing talon or something like that. And I remember that the color was light hitch.
Yep.
And I, to this day, and you know this from making baits for me when I need baits. To this day, my favorite swim bait color overall is light hitch. Talk to me about color. What are your thoughts on swim bait colors? Do they need to be super detailed, uber natural? Like what do you think about colors?
You know, for a soft bait, I do like to try to stay fairly natural and fairly bait fish oriented, whether it be bluegill or shad, which, you know, I think, and it kind of showed in that Lake Fork tournament. You know, a lot of fish, a lot of bass eat a lot more bluegill than you think they do.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people think shad's the deal, but you know, I make a lot of bluegill baits as well because bass love to eat bluegill. But I think as long as it's a shad type color on your soft baits that are moving continuously, I think you can get by with just a shad, you know, just a basic shad, you know, some little chartreuse, you know, either greenback or grayback. And you know, we talk about that light hitch. If you'll look at that light hitch color, it looks an awful lot like a big gizzard shad color.
That's it, man.
And,
I'm gonna tell you, there is something too, and I even have found crankbaits that have this, and I prefer those crankbait colors, but a brown back, like that light tan, brown, beigeish colored back. There's something that in the water column emulates a gizzard shad to fish when it comes to that, because if you get a gray or white body, a little bit of blue mixed in, and a tannish colored back, that just seems to be the best color.
And when you know, these glide baits, especially this slow glide, I take a lot of time and pains in painting these because of the way I fish them. They're sitting still a lot of the time. You know, that's why.
So do you feel like on the hard baits that the details in the color becomes more important?
Depending on, like, if it's a bait that is designed to be continuously moving, I feel like it doesn't quite have to be so detailed. But the way I fish this one, you know, where it spends a lot of time just paused and hanging there, I feel like it is important that it be as realistic as possible. Now there's times when you're going to trigger them on different colors. Just depends on the water clarity. Like right now, I'm sitting here thinking, because this water is a little dirtier.
Well, we had a big rain. We had a big rain earlier a few days ago.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking I may swap here in a little bit to a bone color. You know, those are really the two colors of glide baits that I bounce back and forth of. Is a bone, which is kind of an off white, kind of a yellowish white, and then a shad color. And that's really as far as I venture out when it comes to glide baits.
There you go. Well, and similarly, you know, I will throw a gray looking shad color or chartreuse shad color, you know, which is just a gray one with a chartreuse stripe on a soft plastic bait. But really, and you know this for years, it's give me light hitch and give me white.
Yep, pearl white and light hitch.
Give me light hitch and give me white, baby. I can cover anything I need to. If I got dirty water, I'll throw that white. I got too much clouds, I'll throw that white. If I don't, I'll throw that light hitch, and I'm pretty well good.
If you can't, you know, you can throw like a bone color or a pearl white swim bait, because if, you know, don't think that if they can't find, you know, they can find a shad swimming by, they're definitely going to be able to feel your bait swimming by.
I've had this theory for years now. And here's something to think about, folks at home. When you pull a bass out of really muddy water, what color is he, Heath?
Almost white.
He's real pale. You don't think that shad gets more pale in that dirty water? Mm-hmm. And if that shad is getting paler, he's almost white. And if that bass is eating that shad to live, he can dang sure see your pearl white swim bait just fine. So to me, white is actually one of maybe the best color to throw in dirty water, and it's not really talked about as such.
Dirty and deep water.
Yep. Because deep water's dark. Yeah, deep water's dark. Yeah. Yeah, I think white's a great color for low visibility situations. But one thing I do appreciate about you, Heath, I know how you are, man. You're straight up and down dude, and a lot of fishing guys, you know, the culture of bass fishing, we don't want to tell just everything. And I know how it is, and I may not have asked the right question, but if you guys will ask the questions in the comments, for sure within the first few days of this video or the first week, I know Heath will answer them for you. But one thing I love about Heath, man, he's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. He ain't going to pull no punches or keep no secrets to himself. He'll tell you everything he knows about it.
No smoke and mirrors.
No. And that's what, you know, that's something we've done on this channel for a long time that I've been real proud of, is when we sit down, or in this case, stand up and keep fishing because we're addicted, to give an instructional, we've been real good over the years, I feel like, of even back in the day when it wasn't cool for people to share information on the internet, and we got some hate from the inside crowd because of it. We share everything. We tell you every little detail about what we know, how to fish it, the conditions, just like we've been doing today. So Heath, I appreciate you living up to that tradition and keeping it going, and taking the time to talk through swim bait fishing with us, man. Thank you.
You bet.
Oh, man. Now, find me the stretch where they're on. Let's go catch a couple of these big old jokers.
That's what we're about to do. As I say, we were talking, so I didn't want to move too much.
We were talking, so we just kind of meandered through the dead stretch. Now we're going to go catch them. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you do want to check out some of his swim baits, you can go check them out at SmashTechBaits.com. If you want to check out my preferred swim bait rod, they are linked below. You can find them at YourLakeFortGuide.com. Hey, man, just like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. We appreciate everything that y'all have done to help us grow over the years, and we will continue trying to help you catch more and bigger fish. We'll see you next time right here on Your Lake Fort Guide.